Step one is about almost letting go of the outcome and, I suppose, not being ruled by fear.
I think that fear is fine. I mean, things happen and things are tough. I think the thing is that a lot of the times that gets stuck. A lot of CEOs are incredibly self-reliant, and that also creates a barrier, because there's a beauty in being able to sit with your team and say, like, things are tough. We can sit and feel that and figure this out. But if a leader is self-reliant, then they might feel burdened to shoulder that challenge in some capacity.
And I think you can set up a business in two different ways. You can set up a business in sort of a control, everyone's fundamentally bad, I need to be on top of them. Or you can set up in a way like everyone's fundamentally good and they're trying. And you'll be proven right in both scenarios, but you'll also be proven wrong. And actually, just the people that prove you wrong, you just remove them. But make a choice.
I think on that point, there's an interesting thing there about control, which for me, whenever control's in play, there's fear in play. Like, to try and control the situation is not organic.
Hi, I'm James Johnson, founder and CEO coach, and this is the Peer Effect podcast, where your peers will tell you what's unlocking their 10 million plus business. My guest today, Ryan, is the CEO of Al Rayan. They're Iraq's biggest e-commerce marketplace. And today, we're going to talk about how to scale effectively in uncertainty. Before we get into the show, remember to hit subscribe and let's get cracking. So Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So today we're going to sort of dive into how you scale amid uncertainty, because it's something that you deal with a lot of, which we're going to go into. Sure. But when we were doing the research this, we found out that you started out as a professional hacker. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was in the cybersecurity industry for 2 years, but I was doing it since I was a kid. Basically, I'd be at school doing things I probably shouldn't be doing. And I've been a techie all my life. So I was a programmer before that. And then I graduated in electronic engineering, and I went straight into cybersecurity, which is what I always wanted to do.
Amazing. And how do you sort of move from that to sort of doing what you are doing today?
So the business is a family business. And it started back in '99. I originally wanted to go and do my own path, basically, which is why I didn't join the business straight away. A lot of encouragement from the family and join. But I never wanted the pathway of the thing that was handed to me. So I had my passions, I had the things that I felt I was good at and interested in, and I went down that pathway. It was always technical for me. I always seemed to get on really well with that, and was always interested in computers. So I ended up going that direction. The side of the business that I run was started in 2014. And in 2024, my brother passed away, and I jumped in to help manage the transition. And it ended up being something that I stayed with and have been in position for the past now 2.5 years. Wow.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. And so you've now been doing this for 2.5 years. Do you feel that kind of, have you got anything with you across from sort of that sort of those hacking tech days in terms of how you approach uncertainty and how you deal with things?
I wouldn't say specifically around uncertainty, but I have always been, and this is something that I learned and reflected on over time, someone who likes to solve meaningful problems in a somewhat agnostic way. You know, when I was younger, the type of work that I did, a lot of volunteering, was development on game servers. Like, I'd play online games, but I'd have an opportunity to develop something for the community that I'd be playing with. And so I'd love to work on that, and I'd love to do something that can have a felt difference for the community in some way. So when I was in my cybersecurity role, although cybersecurity itself was a passion and interest of mine because it was quite cool, I ended up transitioning into a little bit more of a business role towards the end. I would say I was very business technical. So I'd started just doing what you call pen testing, doing security assessments for companies for a brief time. And then I ended up doing more focused long-term client work. And by the end, I was working on, we were calling it offensive security operations. So it's more continuous ongoing programs related to offensive security services. So I was starting to lead and manage that part of the business and more of the commercial end and team end of things there. And then I went full immersion when I moved from that into this full CEO role. And
Which question into play there, I suppose, both risk assessment and commerciality, which is almost at the heart of what a CEO job is in many ways.
For the work that I do, I'm a very unstructured or unrigid person in the way that I do things. So, for example, the risk work never like fascinated me. I was never deeply excited by that and processes and all that stuff, which is actually something that I bring along into the role that I'm doing now. I'm very freestyle in some capacity, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. But yeah.
Okay, so perhaps sort of set the scene for people listening in terms of where's the business now? What are some of the main sort of challenges, sort of uncertainties that you face? Because they're on a scale different to just the AI uncertainty that a lot of people are facing.
Right, yeah. The market's always changing, and it's not a safe or predictable market. You know, before I joined and through to now, it remains true. Like, you can never trust the good times fully. It's not this long-term amp up. Like, there are shocks in the market. There are changes this year. There have been a lot of changes in the landscape. Obviously, the war affects things. There's also economic factors in Iraq around customs decisions and so on that have a large effect on the market. This year, they've introduced much higher tax rates. One, it's affected the value of the currency. The value of the currency had dropped substantially, and faith in that dropped. It affected affordability substantially, so prices for everything were going up, and ability for people to afford things was going down. Amid government uncertainty as well around wage payouts for government employees and factors like that have an impact for sure on our market. But you sort of roll with the punches in that way. It's the thing that's certain is uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's so fascinating. Because I mean, everyone is dealing with uncertainty around AI now, and everyone's going, "Oh, what do I do planning forward?" But it feels really baked into what you're doing, both by market and by sector. Like, as the largest e-com player in Iraq, I wonder how you can maintain that sort of nimbleness while also having size. So, what, you're like 150 plus people now?
Yeah. So across both sides of the business, we're larger, but around my side, it's about 130 now. Yeah.
Wow. So how do you maintain, like, because part of dealing with uncertainty is being responsive. Part of it, I imagine, is being intentional. How do you get that balance right?
I think the interesting thing that plays out in struggles of uncertainty is personal factors for individuals, in often more on a psychological level than in anything else. Like, we face a lot of challenges, more challenges or tougher challenges than a lot of people are used to facing and talking about. And yet the way that we move through it is with a comfort in some way. Like, it's part of my mentality and approach that, I mean, things have happened, right? And things will continue to happen. And I can just ask myself where I am in this moment. I think for a lot of people, there are a lot of emotional tie-ins that make it difficult to process that uncertainty, where the challenge that you're facing represents the death of something that's important to you, maybe a fear of failure that people carry with them, a fear of, for different reasons. You know, if you own the business, then it could be, this is my success project. This is the thing that will get me what I need for my family, all of that stuff. So there's a big emotional barrier there for people of, like, when an uncertainty hits, I'm scared and I don't know how to process that. Whereas for me, I think an important thing is I'm not particularly scared of any outcome. Like, I'm ready for whichever way it goes. I'm ready for it to stop tomorrow. I'm ready for it to stop in 10 years. I'm ready for whatever comes in that capacity. So I think there's a really useful thing for people in facing the thing that they're worried about and making peace with the idea of that outcome. Because when you do that, then you're really prepared for whatever direction it goes.
That's very nice. So we'll start with, like, what you do differently as a leader then. But it sounds like step one is about almost letting go of the outcome and, I suppose, not being ruled by fear. So it's like not being too worried about the negative consequence of something.
I think that fear is fine. I mean, things happen and things are tough. It's a hard thing to say to someone like, oh, just don't be scared, right? I think the thing is that a lot of the times that gets stuck, right? And especially with, I'm sure you probably see a lot of CEOs are incredibly self-reliant. And that also creates a barrier, because there's a beauty in being able to sit with your team and say, like, things are tough and we can sit and feel that and figure this out. But if a leader is self-reliant, then they might feel burdened to shoulder that challenge in some capacity. There's a distance between them and the team, or them and the world in some way, that amplifies the weight that's on their shoulders.
So I suppose what I'm hearing is that there's almost temptation to think you have to show that you have all the answers. And if you can acknowledge that, particularly in your case, that there is so much uncertainty, maybe it takes away that burden of like, because obviously you can't have all the answers.
Yeah.
Therefore, you can step away from it more freely. Whereas in some places, you might think, the expectation is that I do have all the answers.
Yeah. I mean, what's the truth that is there that you tend to avoid or struggle to face? And one of those, as you mentioned, is around that, like this discomfort with the idea of I don't know, or I don't have it all figured out. I'm not a finished product. There are things for us to experience and learn from and adapt to here. Yeah.
Okay, so what else does this mean for your leadership style then? Because obviously you've been doing this now for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I imagine it's been evolving. What are some sort of tenets of your leadership that other people might look at and go, this might help me?
I'm very internally focused as a leader. So I'm always looking at what are the things that I'm doing and how am I affecting my environment, especially when things are stuck or not in the right place. If I'm uncomfortable, it's not an external thing. It doesn't mean that external influences and factors don't exist, but ultimately it's my relationship with that reality that dictates how I handle it. You can, an analogy I've given before is, if you go home and you open the fridge and there's some food that's gone off, right? There's one approach that is like, okay, I'll just take that out. I'll clean everything up, whatever, it's fine. And, if you open the fridge and you have a pan, you're like, oh my gosh, this ruins everything. This really sucks. Like, probably it's not about the food that's gone off. Probably it's a tough day or you're in a tough period or whatever. And so people really get amped up on this thing of like, no, I'm dealing with concrete problems. So of course, like, this is what I'm feeling, and it's completely natural and fine to feel that way. But there's a really real value in recognizing that actually this is about me. It's not about the problem.
So actually, sort of sounds like there's been a fair amount of sort of self-work in here in terms of controlling your reactions and not being controlled by them.
Yeah, I wouldn't say controlling my reactions in some sense. I think control can be a difficult thing for people, and you don't want to be in that moment where you're feeling something and think like the thing that I need to do is suppress this somehow. In fact, a lot of times people do that in a way, in my experience, that is quite negative, like to bring it into like some of the challenges that people face in business all the time that I'm sure you see, like when meetings aren't working well and no one's saying anything, right? Because there's a feeling that they have, but nobody is speaking up about it. The real difference is what your relationship is with that thing. Like, what's the part of me that wants to yell about this or get really tight about this or feel angry about this? So there's sort of like am I going to express this with an open heart or a closed heart kind of thing? And so I don't necessarily try and manage myself. What I do is I ask myself, what makes this thing so tense or tough for me? What's the thing about me that it would mean if I accept this thing and I don't avoid it or fight it?
How do you think your team have experienced you differently then as you've done this? Like, what's been the benefit to them?
I think a much more connected and enjoyable environment, and a lot of the challenges that people are facing start to clear up. It's something that we're in the process of right now, because this year has also been a really positive transformational year for me in that. And so we're continuing on evolution. But for the past 2.5 years, I constantly ask myself the questions of, what's going on with me in this situation? What are the things that are stuck? What are the things that are frustrating me? And how do we learn and adapt from them? And I'm open with the team about that. And to get to have conversation with the team of like, yeah, you remember that thing we were stuck on a while ago? I can sort of laugh about the fact that you see how I can show you that actually my pattern was holding that in place. People take such a deep sense of shame about things not working in the right place. And like, when you're looking at especially patterns that are emergent throughout the team by and large, or things that are consistently getting stuck, the question for me is like, what am I doing to either reinforce this pattern or enable the pattern? But it's one or the other.
How are you making time to do this work? Clearly, your business is busy. You're scaling. There are all these sort of changes you need to make sure as you're growing.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's great commitment and there's benefit to doing it.
Yeah.
How have you managed to prioritize this?
It's some of the most important work for me. And my shift in how I spend my time has changed over the last 2.5 years. I moved from being someone who was more involved in directing execution in some capacity to now sitting back a little bit and being in a place where I'm comfortable that the team can manage the operations and that I'll hear about things where I need to. And we have our check-ins and make sure that the flow is working well, but I get to be much more of a mechanic for the company these days. But yeah, for me, the inner work is the most important work because it's the thing that affects the things in your environment that are stuck, right? It's like I mentioned, those meetings that aren't working well is a discomfort within the team to share what they're feeling. And that doesn't always come immediately from your environment, but your environment that you create shapes whether that continues or not. Sometimes people are just used to working in environments where to speak up about that thing is uncomfortable or wouldn't be rewarded, would be punished in some way, or you know, there's a feeling not to do that, especially when people can't handle it. Like there can be a real, I hate to use the word, but ego thing effectively, where if you speak up in a meeting, what does that mean about me as the person who's running the meeting? I take this personally, and then argument and all of this stuff, right? But if people can be open with each other, what they can realize is, oh, when you share that, actually, that's not about you and what you're doing. That's about me. And there's something in me about how I feel about myself as a leader or as the person running this meeting. And if people can start to separate their emotional experiences from being personal in some sense, there's a real power to that, because you start to see that what I'm feeling is a signal, not this thing that I'm choosing to do. I'm not choosing to be angry about this. I'm not choosing to be pleased with this thing or not with that thing. It's just something that's arising. The question really is, what do I want to do with that information?
And so how do you practically make the time? So you prioritize some of the most important stuff that you do. Is this like sort of self-driven? Are you working with someone? What, for other founders, like how can they follow you down this path?
Yeah, so for that last question, I'd put a focus in what are the things that aren't working, and what are the things that throughout a given day make me feel uncomfortable or negative in some capacity. And if you can take those things and really sit and spend some time with them, then the transformation can be there. I think the marker of whether someone will be successful in that is whether they're willing to face the things that might be uncomfortable for them. Like if I sit and there's this problem with the team and I start thinking, yeah, there's this problem with the team, and you just like get in a loop about it and get aggravated about it. Of course, that as a reflection isn't going to take you anywhere. But really the raw thing is to say, like, what is it about me that this hurts? And also, what are the ways that I as a leader am responsible for this pattern? Like if deadlines are being missed, for example, or things aren't being proactively communicated when they're not in the right place, what's the way I as a leader incentivize or repel people coming to me with those problems? What is the way in which somebody who's running these deadlines might feel a sense of obligation to chase perfection and to not fail in some capacity? And can I create an environment that makes it clear that that's welcome?
This feels like it does take quite a lot of self-reflection. Like it's great. It's very controllable. It starts with you first, right?
It's a journey, right? And it doesn't end, and it's probably not over for me, right? The person I am today is completely different to where I was 2.5 years ago, but it starts from there of being able to look at yourself. And a lot of these things are very concretely identifiable. Like, I mean, we could talk about specific classes of issue within businesses, and I could probably see that there's some sort of pattern holding that in place. So those things can be applicable today for people, even if the journey of understanding yourself takes time and is a continued iteration and refinement.
I read the phrase you used a second ago, like a mechanic of your company.
Yeah.
Which, what I heard, I'm not sure what you meant, but I heard this idea of like you're consciously designing your company in a way to allow you to be the leader you want to be. Perhaps you could run through some of the key elements of that design, because it feels like step one is it starts with you.
Yeah.
But then two is you need the right design and the right people and the right teams to be able to execute as well. Like if you wouldn't be on it, someone needs to be in it. What are some of the ways that you have now designed your company?
Something I'm in the process of right now is, and actually let me give a little bit of background for this. A trait that I have is I'm a very people person, and I've, just as a result of the way that I've been raised, been very sensitive to people and empathetic in some capacity. So there's always been a way in which maybe where others might get frustrated with people, that things aren't working, I've been somewhat reflective about it and driven by it and understanding. And there are ways in which that pattern is great as a leader, and there are ways in which it's not, right? And that's part of the journey that especially has unlocked for me within the past year or so, of, again, seeing how my own patterns start to affect the business. Because I used to be in a place where if there were team problems, and I can see that maybe there's some antagonization going on that might be causing some tensions or whatever, I would work with people on controlling their behavior, which is also a place where I have grown to understand that actually that's very oppressing to the soul in some capacity. You don't want to have to live and work through some sense of control. So how do you make it organic, right? It was the case that people would come to me with problems and I would give them advice on how to manage the interpersonal rather than being able to sit with it and say, what does the environment need here? A little bit more. So that context is to say, like, the thing that I'm building now is how can I take the elements of that pattern that work really well and give things to the team? Like, how do I create a really good internal community environment? So one of the things that I'm looking at a lot is psychological safety. And, you know, in a concrete way, there's a happy tie into a lot of research that's been done around this. I think McKinsey had some piece around the importance of psychological safety. And there's this research done by Google called Project Aristotle, which outlines different layers of like what makes a team work well effectively. And the base is always that psychological safety. But what that means to me isn't it isn't like the stereotypical or the obvious, like, are people yelling in the workplace environment? No one's throwing stuff around and making people feel scared, right? It's really this thing about, like, when you're in that environment and something's not working well, are you comfortable to say something? As a leader, like, how comfortable are people coming to you and saying, I'm worried that this thing isn't working? And how receptive is the leader at actually taking that and processing that for what it is? And different patterns in leaders and teams can shape different areas where psychological unsafety emerges. Like perfectionism as a leader can create one environment. For example, someone who's very resistive or takes things personally might create different patterns. So the question for me is, especially with the size of the team, how do we understand what the elements are for each team? Because I could implement something that I could deploy across the entire company, say, just everyone do this, but that will work for one team and it will feel useless or almost, maybe bureaucratic's not the right word, but very process driven for another team who don't get the value of that. Like, there's a company who's quite inspiring on this stuff. I think they're called Next Level. And one of the things that they do is they front load meetings with the question of, like, what's the thing that you don't want to tell me about? And that thing can work really great if it's appropriate, if there's some sort of barrier. But for people who are very open and easy to approach, like, does that feel enabling or does that feel redundant? So part of what I'm doing really is how can I construct an assessment across the teams to understand what patterns are at play within each environment and to be able to enable leaders on a more systemic scale rather than trying to apply a one size fits all. So it requires a way to measure effectively how the internal state of the culture is and psychological safety with questions like, how comfortable are you to fail? Obviously, things like that. I tend to avoid a more corporate approach, I'd say, to things, because it's very easy to get a question like that and for it to just feel like corporate noise and here's your survey. How would you rate us on a scale of, the important thing with that is action, right? So if you can create those questions, create comfort in answering them authentically, and then create an environment where change actually occurs in a positive way, then people can feel comfortable and believe in the change that you're trying to bring about.
I think that action point is really important, isn't it? Because it's hard in an environment of low psychological safety to get people to answer questions because there is low psychological safety. But I think the only way you can really build it is through action and completing on stuff. Because I actually think when you talked about, it sounded like we were almost going to drift into talking about low accountability. There can be a sense of, if you are overly people focused, you can drift into ruinous empathy, you can drift into like low accountability, which ultimately I think leads to low psychological safety because people don't trust it. Absolutely. It's like, how can I be getting away with this? Or how can they be getting away with this? And that for me is almost like the killer low psychological safety.
Yeah. And that's a place that I was in part for a time, because I would, this will connect into something that I know you work with or think about, the excuses concept. And I would take responsibility for solving problems myself, and also didn't necessarily have the level of self-awareness to understand what was really bothering me, which is something that can play out in the workplace. Like, you can talk about deadlines, let's say, and you can say a deadline's been missed, and you can have a conversation with someone about that, and a lot of justifications can arise, and you could sit there and think, that sound like, what do I have to say about that? Can I really say that that's not right in some capacity? And so that was a struggle for me at one point. One key thing that comes from the reflection is realizing that actually the thing that I'm bothered about isn't necessarily the deadline miss. It's maybe the lack of communication. And on a deeper level, it's a feeling of trust. It's like, if we've agreed on this thing, can I trust that this thing is going to happen? And so that's the empowering conversation you get to have with someone. The thing that gets avoided a lot of the time, that turns into a very tense, like, Mr. Deadline type of thing. We need more processes in order to enforce this thing, rather than like, we really need to have a conversation about the fact that I can't trust you.
Yeah.
And that's a mutual problem that we just have to look at and call out for what it is.
I mean, in my language, I do talk about sort of no excuses and what the 3 levels of excuses. The one thing I'm curious about is, in the environment you're operating in, I imagine there are a lot of reasonable excuses.
Sure.
So does that impact how willing you are to hold people accountable?
No. We're quite accountable these days, and we're always looking at what's the thing that went wrong here. And the thing that went wrong usually isn't the deadline miss per se. Like, I'm completely open to the idea that things can happen. And sometimes things are also determined by outside parties. If we're doing a partnership, like this was over on them, like, I'm completely understanding of that. I never want to hold someone to account, quote unquote, in a way that's like, here's a consequence for this thing that you never could have influenced. But the thing that remains with me is like, what's the outstanding discomfort that I have with this situation? It's like, well, you knew that this was a potential problem 3 weeks ago, and now here we are talking about it. And the transition line that I used at the time was, and the thing that was really important for me in moving to a place of greater accountability, was that it's only an excuse if I ask you. If you come to me and tell me, it's not an excuse. That's just the situation. And the problem was that I would align with someone on something being done, and if it wouldn't be done, then the real problem is that you didn't tell me about it, because you knew 2 weeks ago that this wasn't going to be on time. But maybe that person was avoiding emotionally that reality.
Yeah, that's really nice. So sort of almost as soon as they knew, and as soon as they realized it wasn't going to be hit, they're coming to you, and it's no longer an excuse. It's just an update.
If hypothetically we're in a meeting and there's a deadline, and we had everything in the right place, and we have all the results and data on this server, and literally an earthquake just hit and the data center's down 5 minutes ago, and you couldn't tell me, I'll probably allow that as an excuse, right? But the real problem is, like, you knew about this. You knew it wasn't on track. You didn't tell me. I do take a little bit of pace with how I approach that, with a sense of understanding. Obviously, you need to hold to the outcomes that are important. And it's not, I think it's a style thing with the leader of how you approach that. My style, because I have spent a lot of time reflecting on myself, is an understanding of why those patterns are happening. I don't look at the person and say, like, this person is just bad for this. I think that's a really important frame as well, like, that you're building a community, like, you're all in this together in some capacity. So the first question is, do I think that this person wants to succeed? If not, then probably there's a fit problem there. But with the assumption that they do, then it means that they really care about solving this problem in some capacity, even if they defend themselves, and even if they, might argue about whatever the challenge is. But they do care about solving this problem. And the reason why they get defensive is because they care and they know that there's a problem, and they're maybe stuck in it. So for me, in my approach, because I can see those patterns, I try and look at what is the thing that's going wrong there. And the thing is, like, you knew about this 2 weeks ago, but you didn't tell me because you were afraid of letting me down. So how can I, as a leader, create an environment where that's just comfortable and important, and where we understand that that's a necessary part of action? Because what happens if you run away from letting me down is you let me down even more. And you let the team down, and you let the environment down. And you think that you're solving problems by avoiding this thing, but actually you're just getting it stuck and keeping it going.
What I really about this is this is really behavioral rather than performance. Like, it's not like on this task you didn't achieve X. It's a conversation most managers come having. Yeah. This really is a whole behavioral lens. Like, do I trust you? Which is kind of the ABC thing. Like, where do you sit? And if I really don't trust you, there's a bigger issue. But if I do trust you, it hasn't happened. What's going on for you? And what have I done to contribute towards that?
And I think it's a hard conversation for people to have because people don't often like to touch into the emotional layer. It's like an uncomfortable thing of like, oh, I have feelings, like you let me down. To say that for a person might even be tough, like feel like weak, like, no, you don't have that influence on me. I gotta present a strong guard here.
I'm untouchable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's your fault.
I love it. So before we wrap up, I'm curious about, like, practically, what are some things that people do when they look at their business when it either comes to their people, meeting structure, operating rhythm? What are sort of a few things you'd recommend people do to kind of, when they're designing their business, to deal with uncertainty?
The thing that people can do today, no matter where they are in their reflection journey, is to face the fear. To notice, to pay attention to yourself when actually I can admit to myself, that's the first step, that I am scared here. It doesn't mean I have to do anything about it, but the first thing is to be able to face that. And then the growth will come when you can say, okay, what is the deepest fear here? And can I see through it? Can I see through the thing that I'm scared of? Can I see through how the collapse of my company is not the end of my life? Can I see through how homelessness is not the end of my life, right? Like, there's a continuance. And when you can face that, it doesn't mean succumbing to that outcome. It doesn't mean saying like, yeah, okay, I'm just going to do this. Actually, it empowers you to then make decisions from the best place rather than the place that's avoiding the problem. And you'll see that in a lot of companies. A lot of companies will crash just because there's a problem that's clearly there. No one wants to look it in the eye.
I suppose the Kodak examples, lots of examples of like technology coming over the hill, which people are like living in denial of.
Yeah.
What about the people that you hire? Has that changed based off, as you've changed the leader and you're sort of scaling and dealing with uncertainty, has that changed the type of profile that you look for?
I think it definitely gets more refined as we go on. And but culture has always been important to us. And I don't do much first-hand hiring these days, so that happens within the team. Culturally, ultimately, we're making that assessment of whether someone's a right fit. I have a very pro-developmental mindset, and the benefit of the work that I do is I can often see the place that someone needs to get to for something to work. So there's maybe a little bit more tolerance and capacity of like, can we get this to the right place? But the first thing is, are we in alignment? Is this person motivated in the right way? And if I think this is a good person with good core capabilities, and there might be certain challenges, as long as we're comfortable we can get that clear within a decent time frame, then I'd like to extend that. I like to create that developmental environment within the workplace. I want it to be a place that people can come and leave and feel like they're better, not just professionally, but as people in some capacity as much as possible.
So when you say challenges, there's these development areas, could that be behavioral as well as skill-based? What sort of things are we talking about?
Especially behavioral. Behavioral for me is the number one in terms of selection. Like, someone needs to be a good psychological fit in some capacity. The skills are usually just an assumption of the role, right? Like if we're hiring someone for a marketing position and they just don't have marketing capability, it really depends on the role, obviously, whether that's something we're willing to support or not. But if we need certain competencies, we need them. But the better fit and the better distinguishment is, how will this person fit into our culture? And is this somebody who's passionate about what we do and the way that we do it? And if they are, then great.
So the behavioral stuff is not the area where you would sort of expect to develop people. You're looking for behavioral match. And then these gaps you're willing to support on are where?
They are behavioral. We do also behavioral work, yeah. So a lot of the things that I talked about in terms of how we create the right environment, I think the main thing for me is like, can we create a safe environment? And if somebody can't fit into a safe environment, then that's ultimately the the differentiating factor on selection, right? There's an element to which you're not going to know fully when you onboard someone. That comes out in probation period and with experience with them. Yeah. But I would probably be more selective on leadership roles, because leadership roles, you need to have a good behavioral fit from the start.
And how would you identify that when you're having those conversations?
I think that's a really hard thing to describe in a tactical way in some capacity. The analogy I'd give is sort of like if you see someone laugh and you're like, oh yeah, that person's happy or they found something funny. But if you've never experienced laughter before, can you make that identification? And so the inner work generates a lot of sight onto this stuff. If you can see like, oh, this person's uncomfortable and avoiding something, that comes from being able to see that in yourself.
Yeah.
So there's an empathetic element there. You can give tactical things and questions in some capacity. Sort of like I mentioned, we're trying to work on and iterate on the psychological safety assessments, and you can do work around that. I think the challenge is then what do you do with it? And it requires a certain maybe presence to see that.
That's what I'm hearing, like, all this fit together in terms of creating this sort of culture that can scale almost, is doing the work yourself as the leader so that you can identify how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Create an environment of sort of psychological safety, and then really look at people's behaviors, both when they're coming in and once they're in your business. Yeah. And then you can trust them more, and actually you'll be able to deal more with uncertainty, and you sort of more clearly flag what's an excuse and what's just fact.
If I could give just like one idea that helps on that journey, it's to give yourself a bit of love.
Yeah.
Right? Like when things aren't working, I'm fine. Like it's okay. When this thing's not in the right place, like it doesn't mean anything about me as a leader. Like what matters is like, what am I going to do about this? Right? Shame is the stagnating thing. Like when you start beating yourself up, when you start beating other people up, that's a real nemesis in the environment. So on a concrete level, I'd pay a great deal of attention to shame. And shame is a great prompt for reflection, to realize concretely that this is not about them, it's about me. Yeah. And what people don't also realize is that they have an external relationship with the voice in their head. Like it's not, they think this is personal, this is my thought in some capacity, but in a deep sense, it's not, right? Like if I shame myself for this thing, what's the way in which when I was young, I was shamed for that? Like you weren't born as a baby and as a toddler and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad leader. And this is like this Lego structure that I built is absolutely atrocious. But you do when someone criticizes you and then you learn to adopt that.
I think that's really nice. I suppose what we're really saying is if something goes wrong, stop spiraling into something's gone wrong. This is a bad person. I'm actually a bad CEO. Actually, this is like rubbish. It's all like It's just a bad situation. Yeah, they can still be a good person. Absolutely, you can still be a good CEO. Yeah, it's just this particular thing might suck.
Yeah, use shame as a point of reflection. Give yourself and others a little bit of love, and the people. There's a great relief that comes associated with that, of the belief that people are fundamentally good and trying. If you're in a situation where you genuinely think that someone isn't, probably not a good idea to work with them, right?
Yeah. And I think you can set up a business in two different ways. You can set up a business in sort of a control, everyone's fundamentally bad, I need to be on top of them. Yeah. Or you can set up in a way like everyone's fundamentally good and they're trying. Yeah. And you'll be proven right in both scenarios, but you'll also be proven wrong. And actually, just the people that prove you wrong, you just remove them.
Well,
but make a choice.
I think on that point, there's an interesting thing there about control, which for me, whenever control's in play, there's fear in play. Like to try and control the situation is not organic. There's something where you're like, there's this thing that's not in the right place and I really need to get it in the right place. Otherwise, what will that mean about me?
Homeless again.
Or the situation, maybe homeless. Yeah, maybe I'm going to let my family down. Maybe my dad is going to see that I'm a failure, or whatever it happens to be on an individual personal level.
Right. This has been really good. Thank you for sharing. So honestly, like I feel like we're going to talk about one thing, but actually I think we've talked about is what it means, what the things you can control as a leader to truly build an organization that can scale based on trust, based on the best version of you. Yeah. And it sounds like a much happier outcome as well. Like if you can appreciate yourself, you're probably going to enjoy the journey and your team will probably be a lot happier as well.
If you look at scaling as a question and as a challenge, right? Like how many steps might a person take in a day? Like 5,000 steps, maybe more for someone more active, right? If you take that out to the span of a year, that would be, let's round and say a couple million steps, right? You take that out to a decade and let's say 20 million steps, right? So there's this huge Goliath challenge. But how much do you ever think about how many steps you're making unless you're running and active and all this stuff? Like, you'd think 20 million steps is a crazy challenge. It seems really hard. Of course, it's natural to buy into the idea that this is really difficult, but you're just doing what you're doing. And within business, if you just do what you do, then what's so hard about it, right? There's a way in which it's actually easy by default. The only thing that makes it difficult is when you take it personal and when you say, oh no, I couldn't possibly complete this because there are going to be so many buildings and boulders and hills in the way, and you create the obstacle for yourself.
Amazing. Well, Ryan, thank you very much for this, and we'll catch you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Such a good episode today with Ryan. I loved how he really took responsibility for the stuff that he could do to make sure that his whole business could operate in uncertainty and scale effectively. As always, we'll see you next Monday for a Freddie episode in the postbag, or next Wednesday for a founder episode. Any questions, just reach out at hello@peer-effect.com. Thanks for listening and happy scaling.